Technical problems, speaking to a dog. Hello, I'm the JMO, and welcome to another episode of Come Internet With Me, the web show with a gentle premise, browsing the web together. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also find links to all the things that we visit in the Arena channel via the show's blog post, also linked below. You can support the show and find out about my podcast and all my other work at comeinternetwith.me/support. Right, so today's guest is someone that I've known on the internet for a long time, and I haven't seen him in person for 2 years. We were just talking about before we recorded this. It's Cade of New Design Congress. There we go, Cade Diehm, Shiba.computer. Cade is the founder of the New Design Congress, an international digital infrastructure research group. He has spent 10 years embedded in digital infrastructure and security projects in 6 countries. After his studies, he consulted with the government telecommunications clients with Deloitte, Australia. He was a product lead for a CN, Australia augmented reality fashion startup in 2013, prototyped Signal with Open Whisper Systems in 2014, led design and strategy with the emerging cryptocurrency technologies in 2015, and was the chief design officer at Spider Oak in 2016. From 2017 to 2019, he led design and collaborated on information security research at Tactical Tech, a Berlin-based NGO that works to raise awareness of issues in data, privacy, and technology and societies. Highly recommend that you check out New Design Congress and also subscribe and support their work. Cade, would you like to come internet with me?
Hello.
Hey, man. How's it going?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. I just realized when someone speaks my bio, it's actually like a bit of a like what's the word for it? It's not written to be spoken. It's very hard to narrate it, I think. Not from length or anything, just poorly written.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. It's probably poorly spoken on my part.
I was just like following along when you were doing that and like trying to read it myself. And I'm like, wait, this is actually like very difficult to actually say out loud. Yeah. Hey, Thank you for having me. This is great.
Awesome. What have you been up to today outside of the internet?
Well, I have a real life Shiba, and my Shiba has been on it. We've taken the last of the light and the temperature and the fact that we had a bit of sunlight in Berlin and went for a rather long walk, which was really nice, and ran into some other Shibas, which is good. And then now we're here. Yeah, it's been a offline mostly day today, which has been good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, what topic are we searching today?
So this is really interesting. I've been circling around a particular set of questions, and it was provoked by a panel that I was on a couple weeks ago, I guess, around what sort of a set of discussions that have been had around exiting the hustle economy, right? Mm-hmm. This idea of trying to move from a place of be it through Uber or through the creative industries or so on, moving away from the gig economy or the hustle economy and moving into something that has much more solidarity. And so I think what we'll start interneting with today is economic subcultures. And I don't know too much about this just yet. And so I think this would be a fun topic to explore. And I kind of want to start with a couple of examples of this. So perhaps we could look at this from 2 ways. One is to look at alternative infrastructures, I think, to dominant platforms, especially around payments and subscriptions. And the other one would be sort of a deeper dive. And one of the areas that I think I'm interested in the most, sort of independent video game economics, and then also subculture like fandom subculture. So like, I don't know, like sci-fi subculture, or the one that's really, really has a lot of economic solidarity, which is like furry subculture. And to see like if we can find anything about some numbers around this, or like some of the actual deeper research around that. So which one would you like to start with?
Let's go with there isn't much as a result of just searching economic subcultures, like to see if that's like, you know, the first point of call. Let's have a look, just have a quick look. But I think I would like, I don't know if you've seen, but there's an essay about the economics or the of weapons in Borderlands. Have you seen that blog post?
I have not. Let's start there.
All right, we can go find that if I can find it. We might have to web archive it.
What I seem to find a lot of right now is that there's a lot of work that's been done around how to leverage systems to build communities, and then also a lot of work that's been done around how to understand subcultures from a broader pop culture or psychological perspective, but not really much in terms of economies that spring up organically through subcultures. Outside of maybe political examples. And so I'm interested in this from a, what's this subculture theory thing as well? The link above.
Let's go have a look. Subculture theory. Those living in an urban setting are able to find ways of creating a sense of community despite the prevailing alienation. And
because really what we're talking about here is not super new, right? Like it starts, you have examples of this in the United Kingdom with, say, punk, which then, I mean, ascends into the mainstream, and with it comes, for the victors of that, come a sort of level of fame and wealth. But I'm interested in these other ones that don't sort of make it into that mainstream. I mean, that have, even if there is a broader consensus, they haven't broken into the mainstream as much. You know, there's a difference, I think, between, say, what would be a good example? I don't know, just like the difference between like the success of the Smiths versus the success of like some very popular Doctor Who fandom writer who's like able to commission work, or someone who's a very popular fursuiter or something like that.
Maybe we should have a look at fandoms. Let's start there then. Let's
start with fandoms.
Should I put the economics of fandoms or a value?
I think let's start with fandom markets, maybe. Yeah, this is still sitting in
yeah.
Okay, economics of fandoms, yeah.
The fan economy, that's a good word. The economics of fandom, foundation for all right, this is good. Fan engagement. Oh, it's LinkedIn. Might not be able to read it.
Macroeconomics fandom.
Yeah, do you want to look at that as well?
Maybe.
Well, it looks like it's a fandom for economics, but the fan economy.
Fandom for economics is pretty funny. I like this idea of there being like
just all these like economic stands out there.
I'm really like holding back from like saying that I'm going to shop my two favorite economists in like a fan fiction. I'm not going to do that. Okay, we're gonna.
I'm sure there's people who have written about MMT fandom, you know. Fan economy is a traditional sense, refers to the operational income generating behavior relationship between fans and the people who are followed. Most of them are stars, network celebrities, and industry celebrities. Even an enterprise fan economy is a kind of operation mode to attain economic and social benefits through promoting a user's loyalty to optimize the effect of word-of-mouth marketing. Okay. According to researcher American scholar Janet Stager, fans in a broader sense can be traced back to Victorian times. Chinese fans began to appear in the 1980s and early 90s. They were called style-conscious fans at the time, unlike today's popular name, fans. In the contradictory process of being identified, culture, blah, 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 mainstream culture simultaneously. Fans have formed their own unique style within their circles. The fan culture, Yang Ling defined the triple degree for the fan economy. emotional economy, the gift economy, and the informal economy. She thinks the ultimate significance of fans economy in the field of culture is to break the centralized power structure, thus to give more power to consumers. Yes, she drew the theory of Western fan research she drew on. This is interesting. Let's just have a look at her citation down here. Oh, it's in Chinese.
So I think the thing that's really interesting about this immediately is that there's a difference between, say, subculture economics and fan economics, right? Because here what you have is what then becomes the modern day celebrity. And you could argue that what we're looking at here is the background to, say, YouTuber fandom or Twitch streamer fandom and so on. What I'm interested in is like this economic solidarity. Actually, let's try another word. This is good. So let's start here. So I think Janet Steger is an interesting character to bookmark for this. And these scholars, Li Wenming and, anyway, those two, no, that's okay.
We'll hang a lamp on them and have a look up there.
Right. So these three, I think they might be interesting to follow too. But I mean, let's also like just dump a word out here. Let's try furry socialism.
I love it. Okay,
because what we're really looking at here is, as we were just talking about, it's very not furry socialism. That's going to be a very different. That's going to be a very different thing.
How do you spell it?
Furry.
Oh, 2 R's. There you go.
Yeah. Oh, dope! Look at that. That's a very terrible title, though.
Let's have a look at these things. Where are we going?
I have no idea.
Furry socialism. You're soaking in it. The furry fandom is big and complex. We each have our own group of friends and our little sub-fandoms centered around specific shows and interests. It's not easy to see the fursuit for the fluff. Once in a while, it's worth taking a step back and looking at it as a whole. Furry is incredibly socialist. This seems to be a weird statement on its face. But wait, you might say, that's using money. Furry must be capitalism. Socialism doesn't mean abolishing money, like they do in Star Trek. It means the economy has to benefit regular people instead of companies and a handful of ultra-rich. In fact, since the furry fandom literally invents itself without some overarching canon coming from any one movie, TV, animation, and comics, that's a very important point, actually. Is that furry fandom? So I wrote about this exact thing in my essay "Craving Canon," that like the furry fandom self-generates drama, and the term I use for that around solarpunk is that it's a mimetic engine.
Right, and I think I feel very unqualified to sort of make any kind of statement on this really, but I think that I think it's an amplification of groups that exist on the internet in like a very serious way. I mean, I don't know. Do you see drama as being like a central point to an economic strategy, or is it more just like a natural result of these? I mean, because the reason I'm asking that is what happened to the screen? Hang on.
I stopped sharing because we're chatting.
Oh, cool. Okay, that's how that works. Sorry. I was just reading it when we were talking. So I think that there's if you think about things like YouTuber drama, right? That's a very specific capitalist.
Yeah, I'm not using
concept,
drama in that sense, I guess. I guess I'm using drama in the sense of narrative that continues to unfold.
Yeah, and I think the difference is, so if you're there's a bunch of, how do I put this? There's I think drama could be used in a very specific. I mean, if I compare very unfairly, the strategies between, or the cultural makeup of something like a solarpunk community versus furries, I think that it's quite a different. I would imagine there's quite a different understanding of what drama might look like in those. I mean, not that there's no social drama there, but very much. A furry fandom the global furry fandom has a ton of conflict inside of it. But when you bring that up in terms of the idea of within the context of this piece, it's interesting because it feels like there's much like the solar punk example that you're talking about. It's separate from the actual generation of establishment or income, whereas in other fandoms or in YouTuber, like mainstream YouTuber and Twitch economics, that's like a central part of how you bring viewership, eyeballs, and ultimately cash into that system. And that's, of course, comes from, it's a evolution of the reality TV aesthetic, right? Like
it's a very deep-seated like impulse on the internet in general. If there was one of those things that's embedded in the internet psyche, the flame war is certainly like one of them, like as an archetypal behavior, collective behavior. But yeah, I mean, I don't really mean drama in that sense, I guess, like of like conflict. It's more of like story or theater in that sense, in that the furry community or the solar punk community doesn't have a single canon that tells it this is what it is, this is the official thing. No one owns it. So everyone who participates in it then continues to generate new,
right. No, that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by drama, rather than like. But you're right that, not to say it doesn't go on,
I think though, what I think to build off that, like the difference once again is that like that canon is organically drawn in streamer communities as well, in these personality based communities, but that forms the monetization strategy too, right? Like
I think that's a really interesting point. I'm just going to stop sharing again. That's a really interesting point because like if you think about some of the other YouTubers who are massive, David Dobrik, Mr. Beast, they kind of have an extended universe.
Yeah, precisely.
They have their own extended universe. Like they're like, so what's canon in that sense? Like within their own kind of like narrative that they're projecting as part of their content that they're producing. It's very interesting, actually, like to think about it that way. That like,
but even it like the most animalistic or the most simplistic form of this, which is like those react channels, is literally the act of building upon drama. The idea that you put someone at its base level without any kind of context, like no further narrative can be drawn from it other than X reacts to Y, which then leads to YouTube personalities reacting to bad thing on the internet or poor behavior, etc. And I mean, then that turns into like these Inception style comment videos on comment videos on comment videos. Like in the US, for example, like some of the largest YouTubers, some of their most popular videos are call out videos based on other people's work, right? And that forms a kind of canon. And I don't see that being the case in terms of the economics behind these certain other subcultures.
Yeah,
it's certainly not true. It's not true with every single one. For example, not that I'm particularly well versed in this, but there's a number of people that we could cite after this call. There's a number of people who have done pretty extensive histories of Brony fandoms and how much that is reliant upon like standing not just characters but also voice artists that are associated with
exactly
stuff. So there's like seems like there's a gradient in terms of how the economics drives or the attention drives these kinds of spaces or these markets, if you like, and they although they look really similar on the outside, they're actually extremely different depending on the social makeup and where the monetization happens.
I mean, it's the social. I guess it's in that sense, it's around like the grammars and the mores and like the manners of those interactive spaces. Like how like I mean, I talked about this before on my podcast. I think it was one of the episodes where I mentioned you actually about how like different social networks and systems have different grammars that people. Like the Twitter has a very different grammar to Facebook in terms of its like, just like the process that people use to talk, when they talk. I mean, imagine if Twitter only showed you one tweet at a time.
That'd be amazing. I'd be very into that.
If everything was exactly the same, but you had to swipe.
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
Right. Yeah. All right. Let's go back to furry socialism.
Sorry. I think just on you've made a really interesting point there. I just want to like riff on that for just 1 second before we get back to this piece.
Yeah.
Because I think it's actually going to like lean into this as well. I think one of the big metrics for how value is generated is in spaces that have no intrinsic spaces that can't support any other intrinsic value. It seems very clear that those communities or platforms then develop value around the conflict itself, right? Because like I think one thing that the furry scene has that a lot of other communities don't have is a broader network of artists, especially original artists and tool makers and things like that. And to me, there's almost like for lack of a better term, almost medieval in a sense, kind of cultural thing of the handmade. You go to your favorite person who like crafts something for you because they're the one person in the whole world who does the thing that you want, that you love.
Yeah.
Like these are all ideas I think that are really centric to this kind of scene, especially. And in the absence of that kind of production and that value drawn from those productions, that's I think where you get the value drawn from the conflict itself instead.
Yeah, I mean, I've got so much to say on that, actually. I've been thinking about this sort of stuff a lot recently. But let's get to the end of this.
Yes.
Because I want to see where this is going. Furry doesn't want its own venues, hotels, or restaurants. So some of the things that allow furries to meet and mingle are borrowed, rented, and somewhat outside of the control of the event runners. As such, there are some aspects of furry culture that are subject to market forces beyond our control. But once you learn that creators controlling their own business is the dictionary definition of socialism, you realize furries are positively soaking in socialism. This is from 2018. We should have a look to see what the root domain looks like after we've finished this essay.
Yes.
The furry community is exceptionally socialist. We're not just used to thinking about it as an economy. Most of it is commerce, be it art, fursuits, books, etc. It's done by people who control their own means of production. What does this mean? Basically, furry content isn't made in a factory owned by some rich guy. So you're drawing some furry art, you own your computer and graphics tablet, blah, blah, blah. I need to stop doing that. I need to read it out loud. You can even sell it directly to a customer without asking anybody for permission. When has Fur Affinity ever taken a cut of money for a commission that you bought there? That's actually really, do you know what Fur Affinity is?
That is a gallery for...
Is it like a marketplace?
Yeah, it's like a gallery for art. I hope this is not safe for work, but let's just like dive in head first and see what happens. It should be fine. It should be fine. But I mean, I don't know.
Why not? This is the internet.
Well, I mean, despite my my outward appearance here, I'm actually not a furry. Yeah, okay. This is
just looks like
yeah.
It does just look like deviant art from 10 years ago. Well, my deviant art anyway.
Actually, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is what my deviant art looked like 10 years ago when I was like following people over there. So
I mean, so much of it is just like, what's interesting about it, I think, is that there's like a combination of some extremely like the skill sets are really not diverse, but like there's very terrible art next to some, stuff that's a bit more sort of professional. Oh, so look at that. It's by IMVU. Look, scroll down. The copyright there.
Well, I can't see that.
Above the
logo. Yeah. What's that?
Look it up.
Yeah, we are.
That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here, right? Look it up.
Yeah, that's cool. Oh, okay.
Do you remember this? Come on, you must have seen like terrible ads for this.
Oh, yeah, I do remember this.
Is so awful. Oh my God.
I can't even reject them, accept them all, or I won't. Yeah, there we go. Wow.
Oh, wow.
This is cool. Well, I mean, it just looks like living in The Sims.
Yeah, well. I had no idea that they own Fur Affinity. That's crazy.
It makes every single it makes sense though, right? Because I mean, think about who the users of this platform might be.
I mean,
I'm making some wild assumptions.
Yeah, I think so. I think that the virtual world stuff here is quite different to, like, because to me this is again a very capitalist kind of perspective on how to like work with each other. I mean, this is certainly not the same as like running VR chat, for example. There's like it's a very oh my god. Okay, this is going. Yeah, they've got like a full thing. Okay. Like a full they under the domain. There's a full furry component to this.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it must make sense that it's also interesting that this person's selling their paws and I guess their paws for both hands and feet for $60 plus shipping. So I wonder if there's a way, if you're like logged in to purchase this and there's like zero commission.
I imagine, well, I mean, if you want to go down the route of like looking up fursuits and how that marketplaces or transactions happen with that, that's probably very interesting too.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine it's very similar to like replica props and stuff like that. I'm familiar with that stuff just from the people that make them, sort of thing. I follow a couple of their blogs. The product of your labor, the money is pretty much yours alone. This is the opposite, say, of making a car in a factory or even using Etsy, where toys you own by some rich people. Okay, so we're talking about the means of production. TLDR, if your workplace charges $20 to ill and your labor is worth $37.5 an hour. If your workplace charges $10 per ill, your labor is worth $18.75 an hour. Okay. No matter what you're doing in the furry fandom, you're not handing off most of your paycheck to billionaires. Art commissions, fursuits, novels, even books work this way. About half the cover price goes to printing. The rest is split between the publisher. Right. Furry cons, pretty darn socialist. They're controlled by the community, not by some outside company. I mean, this is all very well, but I remember when esports wasn't controlled by anybody.
I guess so. The thing that's interesting about it is that a lot of this stuff has been, like, the furry community has been around for a lot longer than esports, right? Yeah, I knew
I don't know. I mean,
that's very funny.
Esports was happening in like the early 2000s.
Yeah, but I think furries are like early 90s. Sure. Like it pretty much is. I mean, and the thing is like if you think about the trajectory of esports versus furry fandom, it's like night and day, right? Like the furry fandom still has not. I think what I don't like about this piece, aside from it being very, very, very light on actual. Well, I don't want to be mean to the author, but like there's not a lot of like concrete economic theory in this. It's just saying, well, it's socialism because you get more money. Like it's not super great, but I think the other thing that's missing from this is like the solidarity component of this, right? Which is really the thing that I'm interested in terms of like a subculture, is how the subculture has found solidarity. I mean, did you just search for solidarity and find no?
Yeah.
Incredible. So this is the theory that I have. I think that there's a solidarity component to the furry scene, which makes it much higher. It makes it much more likely for people to spend money within that scene.
Yeah.
Because I think that it's not just based around say the idea that you make your own fursuits and you get good at it, thusly you're a socialist. But I think there's also a component of this where the economic network travels along the same routes as the social, like the offline social networks, right? And the relationships that are formed become this kind of thing. And you know, within that, there's like obviously like there's celebrity and things like that too, right? But like what I see there is that like when people work on projects together in these spaces, there tends to be like a much deeper, I want to work with person X because I know this person or I respect this kind of work. And there's like a sense of that. I keep being drawn back to the thing that really got me on this track was looking at how the electronic music scene has struggled for years around things like, you know, the inability for electronic music in particular, but a lot of scenes like this, to really disconnect itself from a traditionalist capitalist model in which the people who are paying for the continual development of that culture changes every 5 years to 10 years, right? Where it starts with, you know, labels, and then it's like brands, and, you know, who knows, and now it's like Spotify itself and so on. And there's like it's a huge disconnect between that scene and how it wants to operate and how it can operate. And so when COVID happened and everything ground to a halt, I was really interested in how that's not translated very well. Like how the scenes, the furry scenes themselves were able to immediately start rebuilding their conventions online. People started supporting each other in these different means, and really like that scene, although everyone's like having a really shitty time right now, right? Like it hasn't been anywhere near as bad for that like global marketplace or that global economic system than it has for, say, the electronic music scene, which has essentially just been absolutely just created as a result of this. And I just find that really interesting, because at the same time, to pass the time, I was playing a game called Armello, which we can look up as well. And one of the things that's really interesting about Armello is it's a strategy tabletop board game style thing turned into like a 3D game, like a Armello, Armello. Yeah. So yeah. So this is really fun. I reckon you'd like this a lot, actually. You play the king. The king is going like Lion King is going mad with syphilis, and you one of whoever's on the board. Your whole goal is to try to overthrow the king and become the new king, and it's very, very cool. However, if you have a look at an example image where you can see some cards on the left-hand side of the screen or anywhere else on the screen.
Yep.
So each of the cards in the game has been commissioned through the furry scene. So each of the pieces of artwork and potentially the animation on that card has a signature on it with the name of the artist, and each person. And what I find really interesting about that is how completely different that is to how other forms of collaborative media happen in other communities. And that is, to me, an expression, regardless of whether or not there's been any kind of drama in the making of this game, there's a level of solidarity that's expressed through this very popular, very successful mainstream franchise, which has come out of a global cooperative cultural production, right?
Let's have a look. I mean, I'm not nitpicking. I would like to know about the developer of Armello.
League of Geeks.
League of Geeks. Let's find out about them. Crafting inspiring video games, enthralling worlds. Meet the team. Australians. Grim Fairy Tale board game. League of Geeks. I would like to find out about. Join us on Twitch. Contributions to. Drop us a line. Founders. There's no about. I was hoping I was going to find out they were a cooperative or something. You know what I mean?
Oh, they're not. They're definitely not a cooperative.
Yeah.
They're like an Australian business. Have a look at Studio. There's a Studio link up there.
Yeah, this is just the same thing.
Oh,
the Studio
okay,
page.
right.
Anyway, let's go back. So I had a look at this socialist teeth meme thing. Art challenge within the furry community on Twitter. It's a parody of of furry Twitter.
Oh, this is drama.
Teeth. Yeah, it is drama. Yeah. Okay. Well, there isn't much.
So where do we go?
We might need to
here?
pick another fandom, or we need like a subculture, like this in terms of subcultural economies.
I can cheat a little bit and tell you something that I found.
Yeah, sure.
So firstscience.org, which is a starting point. First Science, I think. Okay, cool. Yes. Okay. So this is where I found when I went on the panel with UAL in London a couple of weeks ago. This is where I went to draw some of my arguments about how we should be drawing from communities that have high levels of solidarity. If you go to research, there are a couple of interesting values here that I think of interesting under research values, research findings. There's a number of starting points here, which again, this is frustrating because it's extremely, it's very lightweight in terms of the kind of data that we have here. But for example, some things that are interesting: income and employment, and then furry media owned, time in the like these demographics and fandom participation, and how you can kind of cross-reference them against each other. These are really interesting starting points.
Yeah, I actually have the most recent, not that I can access it in this clean browser, but I have the most recent Solarpunk census from the Discord that I'm in that's got thousands of people in.
So this is the, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, it reminds me, we haven't done it in ages. We should probably do it again. Income.
So what's interesting about this is US based, which is kind of a drag, but whatever. But what you can see here is that like the average income, annual income of a con-going furry, that's someone who spends like pays money to go to a convention, is actually close to the median annual income of an American citizen in general, like 20 to 30,000, 10 to 40,000 is like the median income. And yet, if you then look at like participation in the fandom, you see the average spend and the mean and median spend that people make in this community is significantly higher. If you go back to the research home screen, where is it? There's like go up to the top. Okay, fandom participation. There is a not very media owned. There's like a amount of money spent in the 2.14, the bottom of 2.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through these. So that's the annual income of con-going furries, which we got two. That's from two separate. Does this change anything?
Well, there's more too, right? There's the Anthrocon 2012 and 2015 summaries as well. So these are data points that have crossovers from a number of different things here.
Employment, full-time employment, part-time, full-time education makes up 80%.
Right.
Job satisfaction of furries. Interesting.
So the job satisfaction here is like up to 30% of furries are almost satisfied or higher.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like a ridiculously high number.
In a series of studies, we asked participants from different fandoms, furries, online anime events, convention going anime, blah, 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 and so forth, about the fan related media they owned. So this is actually what they owned physically, I guess. Online videos owned 40, 45. So that's bought digitally, I assume. Sports fans.
I imagine so. No, not necessarily. It could be. Well, this is the thing. I'm interested in the sports fan demographic here because it's a nice like control group.
Yeah.
We imagine how enormous that could be. It's quite an interesting statistic.
Yeah. I remember in my permanently moved episode on Fortnite last year, it might have even been 2018. Essentially, the value of the marketplace for Fortnite in the year that I did the episode, which was like 2018. I think it was 2018 I did that episode. It was essentially the same as the European Cup, football cup.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like market size or value, but there's more people reached, and obviously it would have gone up since then, especially since the pandemic. Which, I mean, the numbers involved are insane.
They also lost all of iOS though.
Well, yeah, that's true. Solidarity with Epic. I mean, it seems very strange that I'm in solidarity with a multi-billion-dollar company against a trillion-dollar company, but that's where we are in 2020, I guess.
Both of them need to be broken up, honestly.
Here's targeted for children, AnimeCon, owned content, children's content. Interesting.
So imagine this is like, because so much of it is like, you would have people who would just own everything that Disney put out from like 1960 to The Lion King or whatever, right? Like that kind of thing. What's interesting, I think, is the amount of, the pornographic thing here is hilarious. I actually, out of this, there's two things that's very surprising. One, the idea of anime convention people, that number being so low is very surprising to me, 3.5. Versus also sports fans, which, not that I think, I mean, I keep getting flashbacks to like the 90s where you would have like, where it was like the stereotype of, say, a blue collar shop front, like a mechanic's place would be that kind of pin-up aesthetic,
and
which
all that
seems
plastered in porn,
right? Which seems to have crashed in the last couple of the last decade, which I think is really interesting as well. But I mean, what I find interesting about these three numbers is like how extreme they all are, right? In terms of there are clear leaders between these groups, and I find that really interesting.
Yeah.
And I also find how, despite the fact that you could argue that like the furry community is as online as anime, like both online communities and con-going communities, the idea that they own fewer amounts of violent content is really interesting, because that implies something, I think, of the broader sense of that community as well.
Yep.
Also, Armello is really violent. It's really violent. It's very good though.
Spending in the furry fandom.
This is the interesting one for me.
What year is this data from? 2017.
From 2017, yes. So what's interesting about this? So we in the last 12 months, how much money have you spent on furry physical art and commissions? The mean is $113 versus 16.5 for the median. Digital art and commissions, $175 versus $40. Erotic content, $75 versus $0. Online sponsorship pages, $55 versus $0.
$55 is a lot of money.
I know that. Yeah.
But that's in the last 12 months, which means actually that works out at what, $3 a month?
I still think that's higher than, say, other communities.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
This is the mean, right? Like, and then also the numbers, these two last numbers here really blow my mind, right?
$1,000 on a convention.
On conventions, and $440 mean, on paraphernalia, like costume stuff. Like, to me, these numbers, because what's interesting about this is that, like, I would argue that this is probably far more, it's definitely more than a Spotify subscription. If you go to like 2 concerts a year and you have a Spotify subscription, that doesn't even come close to these values, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would also say that these numbers, like in terms of the amounts, the numbers are probably very similar into like the Warhammer tabletop gaming community.
Absolutely. But here's where this gets really interesting again. Like, there are these spaces where there's huge turnarounds of money. What's fascinating about this is how much of this remains in that community. Yeah.
And retained by it.
Precisely.
Yeah. With the exception of like Patreon, who's
absolutely. Or like Disney, like buying Disney stuff, right? Or whatever's going on. Like the idea that you're like, if you're buying like ears and tails, for example, you are most definitely getting that through a small creator.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
also interesting the line for erotic content being only $78, which when you compare it to the previous graph around pornographic content is really interesting, because like that must mean, if you look at that value, that must mean like the overall, like it really speaks to how like little money there is in that like in erotic content
in that days. Vertical. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's super interesting. Or it also, like, if we're talking about economics, there must be an oversupply.
Yeah, I imagine there is. Yeah, totally. But I just find that really funny, because that's a really dire number compared to like what the ownership rate is, or from that previous piece of data.
Or it's just like a manner, or one of the mores of the community is that sort of stuff is just produced and given away for free.
I think that's what's difficult about that is that it's hard to tell with that piece whether or not they're talking about media that's been purchased versus media that's just owned on a hard drive.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't verified that, but I feel like it's not really useful if it's media, if it's not economics based, right? Like if you're going through like violent content, pornographic content, content targeted at children, furry related content, so on and so on, videos, media, print media, etc., then it doesn't make it's not a very interesting value if you talk about like just how much you earn in a physical context. It only makes sense if it's like, if you're meant to then compare it against other findings, I feel.
Yeah.
Like I would find that very lacking if that wasn't related to actual economics.
I'm actually just thinking right now, as you're speaking, about whether there is any, if there's any articles about the economics of how much money is being spent in the grey market on Animal Crossing at the moment.
Yeah, let's do that. Go for it.
Value. Look as on market value, market size, let's say.
Market cap.
Yeah. Okay, Polygon from June.
As an aside, I was very much a part of the early cryptocurrency scene, to the point where I bought my first Bitcoin with Linden dollars.
Wow, that's amazing. That genuinely is amazing.
It was a 4 or 5 platform transaction to go from PayPal to Linden dollars to Bitcoin. Yeah.
What year was that?
2012.
2012. Yeah, I bought my first Bitcoin then. I mean, I spent it all, but like.
Yeah, I spent it all. I worked for, I mean, you mentioned it, but
I spent it all by 2016 or something. It was ridiculous.
Well, I had this thing where I was working with a group. We built one of the first bank cards that handled Bitcoin, and I promptly spent everything that I had.
Yeah, it was early adopters like you that everyone else should be thankful for.
Oh, I mean, my Steam. Let's just put it this way: my Steam library was very expensive. In hindsight. So
this is all. You see, I haven't actually had a look at this. So this is like in-game currency.
All right. So the reason I'm mentioning that, leave that open. Let's see if there's a currency conversion for Animal Crossing currency to in-game currency on the gray market. But yes, bells
to dollars. Oh, look, there's an advert.
Oh, hell yes.
Bells to USD. Yeah, man. Well, I've been totally. I just feel I was literally like. Okay, so 30 million bells plus 50 Nook Miles tickets is 20 cents. So 6 million bells is 50. All right, 12 million. And let me write this down. Actually, no. If you've got a calculator open on your PC.
Let me open. Okay.
All right, let's have a quick look. So they don't sell 1 million bells. Is there any round numbers? No, it doesn't really matter though. Let's say 3 million bells is
3 million.
15 cents.
What am I doing with this?
So I'm going to go back to Nookazon.
Oh, right. So 3 million bells for 15 cents. Yes.
You see, this is ridiculous because that's not true.
Okay. Well, we even have the currency converter right there. That's fine.
Yeah.
You don't even need me. We've got
that currency converter wasn't accurate to what this website is selling.
Well, this one's different though. This one. Yeah. So that one will be the market price. That other one's going to be gray market craziness, right? That's going to be like, I reckon if you did a deep dive into that site that you were just on, not this one, the one that I reckon that's probably tied to like call center scams, like like laundering money through like call center scams and stuff.
You see, but 10,000 bells being worth $100, 10,000 bells is like 45 minutes work in game.
I mean, yeah. I mean, this is the same as like the people who made a ton of money through World of Warcraft gold, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, they like the early Chinese farmers. Like that's where like gold
Ultimate
farming
Online.
came from.
Ultimate Online was the original gold farming, and
yeah.
I should definitely have Ben Vickers on this show. We should go come into it with me back into old school Ultimate Online. That'd be fun.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Definitely.
Let's have a look. So here's a Reddit post as well. And the reason I just wanted to have a look was to have a look at what the prices were. This was 7 months ago. No. Oh, look, oh man, I feel like who's that YouTuber that does like the games, like Map Hat? Because it's 35,000 bells, 35,000 bells for a Switch, so you could actually figure out what like what the conversion rate is. Hang on a sec. 35,000 bells is the cost of a Nintendo Switch, and 10,000 bells is 100 USD. Oh fuck! Well, that's actually not far off.
The real, yeah.
Wow. I'm just gonna have a look to see how much they're spending.
I think it'd be a pretty big deal if the Switch was cheaper in game.
Yeah.
I would definitely, as Nintendo, I would definitely interfere in the market for that. Absolutely.
Yeah, so this is all in-game prices. I haven't actually ever looked at Nookazon or the Nook Market before. So this is like you go to someone's island and give them the money, and then they'll hand it over.
Sorry, Discord's bugging me. But like, okay, so actually that's a really good point. So on this note about Animal Crossing and like currencies and stuff, like the criticism remains that like there aren't too many examples of economies that exist outside of like essential supply in these spaces, right?
Yeah.
And the essential supply comes in many forms. Like in terms of say music culture and distribution, the distribution is the central supply, right? Where you have seized, if you like, quote unquote, seized the means of production, where no longer must you go to a like physical studio and record, no longer must you press CDs or press material in order to actually have something. For all intents and purposes, the music scenes should be having a renaissance along the same lines as what's happened with like a furry scene, right?
Yeah.
But it follows the same kind of model as what you're seeing with the Animal Crossing thing, even with like, if you imagine what you're looking at there as being a sort of the closest equivalent being something like Bandcamp or something like that.
Yeah.
There's still a very limited structure there, like economic structure. Another really interesting idea about this, which is the inverse, but still like another approach to this idea, is things like how Discord boosts work and how Discord generates finance for itself through the community solidarity.
It's like the generosity of members of the community booster boost to Discord?
There is a generosity component too, but it's all, I think generosity is only part of it. I think that the idea of economic solidarity being the core driving force, where it's not just like generosity, but it's also like a shared micro movement in a sense, or micro cultural moment, I think is what Discord does really well. And so, when you look at what I'm interested in here in general, and why I'm like rambling at you on a Saturday night here for this amazing podcast, is that there seems to be two groups of people, or two groups of communities that have emerged in the last 5 years, which have been amplified really hard this year. One of them is a group that have been able to circulate finance within their own communities, whether through networks, of which Discord, Patreon, all of these sorts of microservices exist around Discord. That's one example of that, where the finances kind of can stay inside these communities. If you think about like how content creators then that money then circulates somewhat within those communities, because it then goes to people who do artwork or sound or whatever, or editing services and so on for these scenes. Then there's the furry scene, which we've talked about extensively as well. When you compare that to open source, which is like made up of like a bunch of people who really, really struggle for finance, versus the it's what we've talked about here, the music scenes that are unable to disconnect themselves from centralized revenue streams. It just feels like there's something here, right?
And I also think like D&D has also exploded in the last decade, but especially since lockdown began, it's like, I mean, there's lots of data on the size of the market and stuff like that. But also, one of the things that I think is interesting about the size of what's happened to D&D over the, say, like the last 3 years on like the community online, is that there's two separate things that have happened. One is that Wizards of the Coast have now have a platform that independent creators can create in using licenses from Dungeons and Dragons and officially use content and sell it through their marketplace. And they take quite, I can't remember what the cut is, but when I looked, it seemed quite reasonable, much less than 30%. And then the other thing is that the community and a lot of value circulates amongst the D&D community, the same as we're talking about with the furry community, especially with like, there's now professional DMs for D&D that you can hire to like do your work under the pandemic sort of thing, like Zoom DMs that will come in and give you a game of D&D as a company or, as a team. And there's like professionals that are professional DMs, which, I mean, even when I was a teenager or in my 20s, I couldn't even imagine the idea of being a professional D&D DM. But then the other thing is that there has been a shift in the community where it's also now something that you don't participate in. It's something that you spectate and that you watch, with the rise of shows like Critical Role and stuff like that, which I think is also interesting, because those people as spectators are participating in the community in that they're watching the content that is being produced by the people who have written and are also like playing the game, but they're also supporting the Patreons and and probably even and buying the content that the creators produce, the rule books and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, this is where this gets really tricky, right? Because I don't know where, like, the lines get really blurry when you start to compare these communities, right?
Yeah.
Because what's clear is that, like, the reason why I focus so heavily on the furry scene is just how completely undominated it is. I mean, there are obviously like furry communities or conventions that are massive or whatever, and then ones that are not, or failures in like conventions and so on. But what's really blows my mind is like they own all their own infrastructure, they run all their own ticketing systems, they run everything themselves, right? They run they make everything, everything from the artwork for your individual and all the way through to the conferencing infrastructure, everything, right? And the last time I saw anything like that at that kind of scale, where people could make a living in very ad hoc ways, where labor was like completely connected to something like that. Like my partner is a musician, Abelard or house tier as well, like two different like things. And when he was in his late teens, he made something like 20,000 a year making material content for Second Life for people, just as commissions, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that, once again, is that like in those circumstances, there's a kind of central controlled point, but then there's a disconnect, right? Where instead of going to the central point for the cash, all of the transactions, and like there's a bridge between those two worlds. There's a bridge between the central economic system and the surrounding marketplace. So you have like the actual highly centralized, deeply controlled set of circumstances, in this case an MMO. And I would also argue that this is true of like D&D, which has like a central IP associated with it. And then within that, there's like these extracurricular economic models that like spring up organically around
peripheral.
But that's right. But the thing is that model doesn't compare to what's happened in the furry community globally over the last 25 years. And I'm interested in that because I think that, like, for all intents and purposes, you know, furries are extremely online. They all play games. I mean, what are they based off? They're based off like Disney anthropomorphic characters and these other kinds of very popular characters. Yet somehow none of that has translated into a centralization of that culture. And I find that incredible, right? And there aren't too many examples. Like, even though there are examples where you can see very clear, strong economic foundations being set up around other fandoms. I mean, you've dived into, you know, Ultima Online. You've dived into D&D. Warhammer is another one. Like, these are all exactly the same. They all follow these, not exactly the same. They all share these similarities. But there's that core difference here that I feel like people aren't really talking about. I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what it is about it. It's not like it's unknown. I mean, ICP, like one of the ICP members, the Insane Clown Posse, his daughter is famously a furry, right? And it's like, it's just crazy to me how like mainstream it is, and yet it hasn't been muscled in on in the same way as almost anything else.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. Like, what is it? What I assume that within the furry kind of communities, and I'm massively speculating here just from the way that, like, I know about, like, just from being involved in the solar punk community, and like it's something that people think deeply about, is that what exactly are the poison pills or what's another word? Like poison pills or like the dead man switches within the community that mean that capital is unable to co-opt and like control these these scenes. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, precisely. And hang on, keep going. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, I mean, I'm just thinking that like that there must be some core values or values, narratives that participants within the community tell themselves as separate from kind of value. A value is something, you know, that is self-generated, let's say in this case, and then like there are narratives that the community tells itself. Like, what exactly are those things, if you're deep in the community, that prevent capital from coming in and exploiting it? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
what's interesting about that is, so I'm 3/4 of the way through a foundational essay for a pretty core research project that I'm hoping to, that we're just kicking off this year at the New Design Congress, and will carry us through all the way next year. And just as an aside, we're looking for partners on this. So if you're interested in cutting edge research, have a listen to this. So this is a foundational essay called You Win the Internet Today. And what it's about exploring the idea of digital identity and the way that we've built digital identity, which is this self-curated authentication, cryptographically powered system in which you authenticate into a Twitter account, you authenticate into a computer, and there is a representation of yourself in that system. That is a Cartesian, it's a rationalist identity, right? It's if you think of the phrase "I think, therefore I am," I would say that the digital identity that we've built today is I curate, therefore I am.
Right.
And so we have this weird situation in which we have these deep online spaces that we've developed for 25 years that are reliant upon a kind of self-expression and a performative narrative that is tightly controlled by the individual within the confines of a larger system, whatever that system is. And that plays out both in how the system is designed and also how the interface presents that too. So, how Facebook's real name policy is implemented both in the back end and also in the interface, for example. That then I think leads to this concept called interface disassociation, in which you dissociate because a rationalist identity in an atomized society is not enough to fully understand you as a person, right? And as a result of that, it leads to a fracturing of self when you have to live the majority of your time online, which then leads to, I think, a sense of extreme desire for belonging. Because I think that, there's a number of people we can drop into the show notes here that claim and argue very, very clearly against this sort of Western idea of rationalism, in that it's not just about the individual's understanding of oneself and knowing oneself, but also the community reflection, the mirror that comes back to you from other people that makes up that identity. And that reflection is deeply non-rational. It is an irrational response because it relies upon not just it's irrational both in its nature and also in its presentation. And what I mean by that is that you cannot wholly know why someone else is reacting the way that they react to you, or why they treat you the way they treat you. And just because of that, it's not a rational position. Like the reaction that someone has to you is not, once you interpret that, it cannot be wholly rational. So this connection, the community response to the community identity that's generated for an individual, combined with the curative or the curatorial version of that identity, is what leads to a fully realized identity. And the fact that we don't have that is where that fracture comes. And now this, of course, has been the basis of, say, a lot of Japanese media in the 90s and 80s. This is, of course, a foundational component of even popular anime like Ghost in the Shell, which deals with the idea of identity and representation of that through like a cybernetic or a cyborg society. But I think on a day-to-day basis, this is true of what we're suffering through, especially through the pandemic and this pandemic shock that we've had, right? Which has, I think, led to the acceleration of things like QAnon and other conspiracy theories things. This idea of being atomized and then trying to find oneself in a time of crisis. And this essay sort of dives in a little bit to this. The reason I'm saying this is because I'm fascinated by the fact that on the surface, the furry community, for all intents and purposes, is a rationalist identity system. What you're literally doing is you are within the confines of a cultural aesthetic and an artistic aesthetic. You are developing a character or a series of characters or personas that you then use to present to other people with. And yet somehow, even though that's true too, it still is resilient to the attacks of, or the atomization that the broader internet has had that has been unable to fight off. And I find that really bothers me, not in a bad way. It bothers me because I don't know why it is. And we also can't find it. I don't know. I can't seem to find too much information as to why that is as well.
Yeah. I guess it's one of those, if there are any furry anthropologists who've done ethnographic work watching this, on the off chance, do get in touch with Cade.
Absolutely. I think the reason why this is interesting is because I think it's how you start to build economic solidarity in other communities that don't rely upon and that are resilient to duopolies or cartels or monopoly systems, right? What's interesting is how resilient these systems are, despite the fact that they rely heavily on monopolized systems. In another essay that I published in July, I write about how decentralized communities are not immune and have not been immune since the early 90s to once a decentralized system challenges power, either economically or culturally, it's then immediately co-opted and crushed. Right? What's interesting to me is that this economic solidarity of the furry fandom has kind of sidestepped that, right?
Yeah, I think there is something different about that particular community, in that unlike some of the other decentralized communities that you talk about This Is Fine, that essay that you talk about?
This is fine.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting is that those decentralized communities there isn't a life way that is being expressed as part of those communities. You're a participant, whereas like being a member of the furry community, you are expressing as an individual life way that you are following. Do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Right.
I don't know if that's the right word, but I think that's also like a very interesting, an interesting point. And also, I'm also thinking about Adrian Hon's 100 Objects, a History of the Future in 100 Objects, where he cites or puts quite a lot of the most oppressive technologies in that book. It's a great book. There's a new version coming out. I think it might already be out, actually. But he cites a lot of the technologies that the most oppressive technologies, about like deleting certain things from your brain, for example, are religious, are deployed on religious grounds, sort of thing, because it's a life way, or if that makes any sense, like in the opposite sense of it.
I think so. It definitely is a thread, right? Like it's definitely something to read for sure.
Yeah.
But I think what maybe this is what this has made me think of. Okay, so it might not be related, but it just when you were talking, it made me think of this. So I'm on Resonate's website right now.
Do you want to share your screen?
Yes, hang on. Let me just full screen it so that I can actually like do this. Okay, so I'm on this. Oh, you can't. I can't. You have to enable me. You have to let me. You have to give me permission.
Make host.
Please grant me this. Does that wreck my recording? No. Okay. No. Okay. Good. All right. So, I need this one. Okay. So, I am on this website called Resonate. Now, Resonate is the easiest way to describe it is that it is a blockchain-powered Spotify alternative. Support the artists you love. What takes other services 200 plays, we do in 9 with Stream to Own, which I'll click on in a minute. Co-own your platform, be part of an active community, share in decisions and in profits. Set the terms on which you share, have a say in how your information is used, decide on how to distribute your music. Now, here's what I think when you're saying like delete things from your brain, and the idea of like the 100 objects, and maybe I'm really thinking simplistically about this. My concern with things like this, firstly, this has been around for a while, hasn't really had that much of an impact, which really bothers me.
Yeah.
But the thing is like the kinds of people who you would want to be early access people to this aren't the kinds of people who are coming here. And more than that, if you are like a furry artist or even a brony artist, I mean, there's a brony record that I could probably try to find that has, actually, I will go and find it. But let me finish that thought first. So I don't think this is how you build this kind of, I think this is trying to build a level of solidarity based on a messaging or a philosophy that's very much drawn from like capitalist tech as it stood, right? And I think the issue is that when I look at this, I don't feel the solidarity that I see when I observe the furry scene, right? Like I don't see these pathways here. What I see is a alternative payment model, but it is as abstracted as any of the other streaming services that already exist. I think that it's not just enough to have like a technical intervention, if you like.
Yeah.
So let me show you this if I can find it. A friend of mine sent this to me. God, hang on. It might be in a different Discord channel. 1 minute.
I suppose at this point we should also give a shout out to Matt and Holly on interdependence.fm and their podcast. Like they're also like talking through and working through this exact same thing in the music industry with guests on their show.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think like, okay, let me just just to roll on that a little bit. And I think this is like, if there was one criticism that I would have of that podcast, it would be like that it still hasn't scratched that itch. Look at this. Okay, so this is for me, I think this is awful. This is a look at the size of this record, 72 tracks, right?
Wow, yeah.
Look at how many people have bought it. Okay, it's name your price so you can pay whatever you like for it. Let me just keep clicking this here.
Wow.
Let me just keep going.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as far as I can go because that's the end of the thing. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it just goes on and on and on, right? Like and I mean, this isn't even furry stuff. This is like Brony stuff, which is arguably even more niche. But like, look at the spend here, right? That's blows my mind. Mm-hmm. Why is this not like, this is what this should be aiming for? And this is like, these are the questions that we should be asking. And I don't understand how to frame those questions yet. Right?
Yeah.
And I think.
I agree. Yeah. What is that album?
Ponies@dawn.bandcamp.com.
Okay. I just want to know so I can put it in the
It's
arena.
Really, it's not good. It's not a good record.
I'm still going to put it in the arena. Well, we have been going for an hour and 15 minutes.
Is that bad?
Wrap it. No, not at all. It's been great. Really, really interesting. We should probably wrap this up.
Okay. So if there's one, can I just make a final thought here just on this? So I think what I'm interested in, especially in 2021, I think that there is a range of, and I'm a little bit not frustrated. I'm sad that we didn't get to the bottom of furry socialism, right? Instead, we kind of veered off and had a larger discussion, which has been super great. But what I'm interested in is as we were talking about at the beginning of this, 2020 was terrible. I think 2021 is also going to be highly uncertain. But what I know for sure is that it's really clear to me that the current systems that we have right now must change in very specific ways, especially around, say, again, just to overuse this word, economic solidarity. Now, what frustrates me as someone who's observed and researched and written extensively about the politics of systems for the last 3 or 4 years, there is a disconnect between the people trying to solve it on an infrastructure level, who tend to over-engineer and over-promise and under-deliver on what these projects are capable of. Mm-hmm. This is true of all decentralization projects. It's true of a lot of open source projects and so on. But then the alternative is also bad, in which the fracturing of solidarity amongst different communities that have been really affected has been quite difficult to watch. And yet what I see is definite pathways where the goal is not necessarily to how do I put that? You just sent me a message and I don't know how to do this. Okay. So as I was saying, what I see is a set of opportunities that requires a level of a tighter sense of cultural cohesion than we perhaps have. And I don't mean that in a sense of that I think that people are, on good terms with, I'm not saying anything like that. What I'm saying is that there's a set of relationships on a broader set. And indeed the panel that I was on with Creative United and the UAL in London was around how can we rebuild value in arts markets? And, to me, the answer is it's not simple, but it's clear, which is that the easiest way to do this, or the surefire way to do this, is to build this kind of solidarity and that there are working existing models that show how this works. When there's a level of solidarity there, that's then possible. Yeah. And this has precedence, right? This is of course why Black Wall Street was burnt down in the the turn of the century in the United States, because it was an economic threat, and economic solidarity leads to empowerment. Mm-hmm. And what I'm interested in is I'm really bothered by the fact that isn't a core fundamental part of a lot of systems design right now. And at the same time, I think that we could, that there's a lot that we can do to study these existing ones that already either historically or are active right now. And instead, I just don't see, like, I think we've proven today that there's not really that much out there just yet.
Yeah, not in terms of like actual numbers, for example.
Right.
I actually just wanted to add to that in terms of like the historical bit, is that I'm really interested in kind of the history of dues paying organizations. Just from my own personal life, like thinking about like my grandparents when I was growing up, and they would be members of the Amateur Dramatic Society, where they paid their, you know, it was like £1 a month or whatever it was in the 90s, which is probably about £3 now. Do you know what I mean? Like they paid their £3 a month to the Amdram Society. They paid their £3 a month to the club that they would go and hang out in. You know, there's like the working men's clubs, like all of those kind of models. And then you have things like the publishers unions, which was a larger monthly fee, but you got a hardback book every month that was usually written by someone that was in the publishers union.
Absolutely.
And it was all niche topics sort of thing. It was, you know, and there's a really great essay that I'll put in the arena about the Peak newsletter, about it being in the 1930s. About how it was very common that you basically paid every year. You sent your $15 or whatever, $12 in the post to someone, and then they printed their own newsletter, and then you got it sent to you in the post.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I think, just on that note, like what you've said there is exactly the point. Right? It's that this is not a new. What I'm suggesting here is not new whatsoever. Instead, what's interesting about that particular scene is how it's been able to operate in a like highly resilient way, despite the fact that it exists within a deeply centralized, deeply commercial set of enterprise, like the networks that they operate within, quite counter to that, to how that subculture operates.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I'm interested in is like, there are definitely ways in which we could reproduce or extend upon those examples that you've given today. And again, history is full of these ideas and these examples of them working. But what's interesting is how do you do it when you're living in an extremely hostile, neoliberal, like hyper-capitalist society? And it turns out that I believe it is possible.
Yeah.
But it requires a different way of thinking about these, I think.
Yeah. And it's also, not only do you need to roll your own culture, which is something that I've been talking about for quite a while, but also those tools to be able to support you to roll your own culture need to be available.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. On that note, where can people find you online? Where can they find out your stuff?
Yeah, so the newdesigncongress.org, we have an open collective, which is opencollective.com/newdesigncongress, which is our alternative to Patreon. We
it's a more
really
powerful
kicking
platform as well.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's because you have hosts who like support different community. It's a very communal set of platforms.
I'm in a couple of those communities, and
it's really nice.
Yeah.
But so I think, so that's where we're at, newdesigncongress.org. And like keep an eye out. We're going to start drip feeding some of this research over the next couple of months, I'm sorry. It's a multi-year, I think, study.
Yeah.
But alongside that, we also, we do a lot of other work around resilience in communities and systems.
When's your film out?
Oh my goodness. I don't have a date for it yet, but I'm going to that's the thing. If you join the Open Collective, we're going to do some private online screenings and stuff. But pretty soon. We've got a film version coming out on This Is Fine, which is the essay about the destruction of multiple decentralized or multiple political movements online and how that happened.
Yeah. I saw it at the thing. It's fantastic. Recommend everyone go watch it. Well, that has been Cade coming internet with me. I think it's been a really good episode.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming. And don't forget, if you've made it all the way to the end, you can support the show and find out about all of my work at comeinternetwith.me/support. And thanks very much for watching. Bye.
Thank you so much.